If you'd like to welcome Jason up to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say thanks for having me here. It's great to have an accessibility community. It's something we're lacking where I'm from in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. But my company is called Accessibility Shield, and we are on a mission to make digital accessible for everybody. What I'm going to talk about today is a couple of things I hope that maybe you don't know about yet and you'll find interesting. It's not about, one of the things I find exciting about this work is we're in a time and a place where society is trying to help people who are otherly abled. And that didn't always exist. That didn't exist for most of history. So we have some legislation, some policies, some standards and things like that. But right now it seems like we're trying to say we should be fair. You know, this person can't see, this person can't hear, this person can't hold a mouse because they have tremors. All these things that we see in the world where we're asking companies and governments to help us. The more I research this, the more I think that's the wrong angle. So what I'm proposing today and what my company is all about is looking at things from a little bit of a broader perspective and finding out what type of people help us innovate and move forward as a society. The internet is something, for most of us, it wasn't even around when we were born. It's new, it's growing so fast. How do we control it? How do we standardize something that's just completely new to human history? It's all come about because of disabled people. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. Vint Cerf is called one of the fathers of the internet, if anybody's familiar with his work. About 50 years ago, he was a graduate student in Berkeley, and he heard talk of a new form of communication. And they were telling him it was going to be done with computers. And this intrigued him because Vint Cerf was born in 1943, the same year my mother was born. And he was born premature. And back then, when you had a premature baby, they were still trying to figure out how to get those babies healthy. So they put them in incubators and they cranked up the oxygen levels, and they thought this would make them stronger and healthier. But in fact, what it did was it fried their sensory organs in a lot of cases. So my mother has trouble hearing and seeing, and she was a twin, and she was the only one who required the extra oxygen, so her sister didn't have any of those problems. But Vint did. He had it even worse. He was born completely deaf because of this. So his whole life was a struggle for telephones, meetings with more than one person. Imagine if you're not deaf, the situations that you run into where you can't follow what's being said. It was frustrating for him. Fortunately for all of us in this room and everyone on planet Earth, he was a brilliant man, and he was ambitious, and he saw an opportunity when they talked about digital communication. And that conversation was ARPANET, which was the precursor to the internet, funded by the United States military to let the armed forces talk to each other and share information secretly and things like that. He wrote the first 2 nodes of the internet. He talks about it openly. He's a passionate advocate for accessibility, for digital accessibility. He did this because he wanted to find a better way to communicate for himself and for other people. I believe his wife is deaf as well. But he wanted to improve our ability to communicate. And because of who he is, we now have the internet. What he's done is basically because of his new perspective, right? And because of his struggles in life, and this is kind of what I'm going to get to a little more in this talk, is that the people who have struggles and challenges that the rest of us don't are the ones who innovate and move us forward. It's almost universal in human history. It's never the person with a great happy life and a happy childhood and plenty of money and nutrition and just a wonderful that's great. I'm sure that's great. I imagine it's great. But that doesn't do anything for the rest of us, right? Can we all, I mean, it's a great way to people to live. There's billions of people. Some of them are just having wonderful lives and they're going to have kids. That's fantastic. But we're in a place in society right now where we need to fix the internet. First of all, we need it to be accessible for everybody. And I'm going to talk more about why we need that. But also, this is not, what we're doing now isn't going to help us moving forward. We have to have a better way to do things, a better way to communicate, share information, and get the information. Right now, we're at a point in history where all the information that's ever been in the world is available to everybody. But if you're at the coffee shop or at the bus stop, you still hear the same conversations. What's the weather going to be like tomorrow? We still don't have an understanding yet as a society. So the people that are going to innovate today, using the internet and the World Wide Web, are the ones who are going to advance us. Has anyone ever heard of joy bubbles? Okay, some people have. Joy Bubbles was born blind, and he was born with absolute pitch, and he was born with an ability to whistle at 2600 megahertz. 3 unusual qualities, but he was also a terribly ambitious guy, passionate and kind of mischievous. He played with his mother's telephone. Back then, we had telephones like in the kitchen, and you had to like pick them up and stuff. I don't know if you guys remember that. He would play with the receiver until it connected to another tone. It would play the sound, and then that would open up the connection to the next line. And that was how telephones worked back then. It's how the only computers 50 years ago, the only real computers were those computers. Not to speak too simply about it, but the telephones had the best computers in the world, billion-dollar systems, and they used tones to talk to each other to open up lines to the next line, and then they would figure out how much to charge you. So if you go to a payphone, you dial a number to Perth, Australia from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it's going to say, give me this much money. And when you put that much money in, it's going to play a sequence of tones at 2600 megahertz. By the time he was a freshman in college, he had memorized all those tones, and he could whistle them at will. So he was standing in front of a toll booth, a payphone booth at his school, charging $1 to connect a long-distance phone call to anybody who wanted to talk to somebody. That got him arrested, obviously. And there's stories, there's a lot of stuff about, there's some stuff about his history as a person, which I don't know about. I obviously didn't know the guy. There was some controversy there later on in life. He changed his name to Joy Bubbles legally. He founded his own religion for the life of eternal childhood or something like that. A little bit of Michael Jackson-y type of thing going on with him, which I don't want to weigh in on. But the fact is, what he ended up creating was something called the blue box. And he basically recorded his tones, put them in a little piece of blue plastic, and he sold it. And there was a lot of drama. Like, he found a manufacturer to make them, and then there was all these arguments. But anyway, some of these boxes landed on the street. And one of the first person to get one was a guy named Steve Jobs. This is before Apple, and this is before the garage where they built, and they innovated and all that stuff. This was the thing. And there is a YouTube video that you can dig around and find from the Silicon Valley Historical Association where Jobs talks about this at length and gives all the credit for his innovations and his career to that blue box. When he figured out what it was, the first thing he said that happened to him was he realized that the power of ideas. This little piece of plastic can hack a billion-dollar computer system because someone was smart enough to understand how that computer system works and to put this blue box together. That transformed his view on business and on innovation and on technology. He gives full credit to this as his first product and as a thing that created Apple. He took it to Steve Wozniak in the garage and said, hey, can you make this digital? And Wozniak said, yes. Can we give it away for free? And Jobs said, no, let me handle that part of things. It was the first Apple product. It was an illegal product, so they don't talk about it much, but it is true. You can get that verified. And that is what inspired Steve Jobs to give us Apple, which gave us the laptops and the phones and everything that we take for granted today. These two people that we've just spent 7 minutes talking about have contributed and inspired all the technology that we have. I mean, think of the things that the internet and Apple have brought to the world in the last 40 years. It's staggering. And we wouldn't have it without the two people who happen to be disabled. And I don't want to focus on the disability, and if I say anything that's offensive in any way, it's not intentional. If I'm saying the wrong term or whatever, I'm not trying to be insensitive. But my theory is that the people, what they were dealing with in their personal life, factor in that they were genius and brilliant and energetic and determined to succeed in life and all the other things that a lot of us share. Their perspective is what gave us the internet and Apple. Their perspective was different because of their ability or lack of ability. And we're here talking about accessibility, which means that we're trying to understand other people's perspectives. We're not saying everyone should be the same. Everyone, go to IBM and get a job. Not against IBM, I'm sorry, that's just I know someone here was working there, but it's just get the picket fence and the family and all that stuff. We have I won't say American dream, but a dream of success in this, currently in society. But it ignores perspective. It ignores challenges and the fact that life is difficult and scary as hell, and none of us really know what we're doing. Let's be honest here. Nobody really knows how to fix things. We get together with other smart people. We try to figure things out, try to feed our families. We're just trying to get by. But there are people out there who have the luxury, well, not the luxury, but what they've been hit with is something that most of us wouldn't want to carry. The next one is a gentleman named Hugh Herr, who actually comes near where I come from. When he was a child, he had an obsession with mountain climbing. So by the time he was, he was in his early teens. He was breaking alpine climbing records around the world. The guy was the biggest thing in mountain climbing to come along in a long time. One of these trips, he was going, bigger and faster and longer with all of his challenges. They ended up being stranded on a mountaintop overnight. They were rescued, and he survived, but he lost both legs, and he lost both legs like above the knee, kind of lost both legs. There's a picture of him when he woke up from his coma after the surgery, and he's in this bed and he's kind of staring down where his legs used to be, and he does a TED talk, which is really interesting, and he talks about this. And he's a really interesting guy, but he said the first thing that came into his mind when he absorbed what would happen to him in his life was that his legs weren't really the problem. The technology was the problem. So this is, I think, maybe 35 years ago, somewhere around there. They're giving him prosthetics from World War II. This is an industry that had no innovation at all. Interesting enough, accessibility, at least in America, it comes from what we have. We do have some laws that we're trying to enforce for inclusion and accessibility. They come from a lot of people getting injured in World War II, a lot of soldiers coming home who were strong and strong-willed and strong-minded, but they didn't have the limbs they had when they went over to war, and they were figuring it out themselves. They wanted to get that job and support their family, so they were figuring out their prosthetics, and that's really what we had years later when they started giving him these crutches and these wooden legs. So this guy, at that age, decided to study biomechatronics, get his PhD at MIT, found a biomechatronics lab, and changed the way we use prosthetics in the world today. If you see him in his TED Talk or anywhere else, if you see him walking down the street in Perth, as long as he's not wearing shorts, you won't know that he doesn't have legs, to the point that those prosthetics communicate with the nerve signals in the spine. They flex like a foot or a knee or an ankle. He has transformed this industry. And it's the reason I'm talking about him, it's accessibility, I think, in nature, but this is another guy who at birth was kind of like a normal person, or I guess the average person, I guess you could say, but he was given a challenge which changed his perspective and made him change the world. This is a guy who has vowed to eliminate physical disability before he dies. And when he says it, people are actually like, well, they don't laugh. They're like, oh my God, maybe he's going to do this because he's done so much. Again, it's this perspective and this challenges that we're faced. Not most of us, like if it happened to me, I'd probably still be in bed like, oh my God, what the hell's going on? But for some people, those challenges make them innovate. And my reason for talking about all these people that have this unique perspective is because what we have today is an internet that's inaccessible. 97.8% of websites are completely inaccessible. When I started this company, I would go to my partner who's the software engineer and say, here's the potential client, is the site accessible? 2 weeks in, I stopped asking. None of it's accessible, none of it works, nobody cares, there's no curriculum at the university level to tell developers that this is something you should be concerned about. The companies themselves aren't worried about it, even though there's laws in the books that are supposed to be enforcing it. It is a perfect storm that I stumbled into accidentally because a potential client I had when I owned a different company was a blind gentleman who was using a screen reader when I got to the meeting. And I was like, what is going on here? Why didn't I know that the blind had to access the internet in a different way? And why didn't I know that the internet that they were accessing isn't the same internet I'm accessing? This all happened in a flurry, and we started this company to change things. And the reason that I'm in Perth to talk for 20 minutes to all you nice folks is, number one, to hopefully make some friends and tell you about what I do and learn about what you're into, but also to kind of join forces and get this done. I was talking with Scott a little bit earlier about what's happening in Australia and the accessibility world for digital. If apparently there's no laws in the books that are enforceable. We have a law in America that's not enforceable. It is kind of enforceable. Right now we have the ADA law. I don't know if I'm being redundant here, but basically they're using this law saying that you have to accommodate everybody. You can't discriminate. This is another interesting aspect about this industry for me, and one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it is the precursor for ADA is Martin Luther King. This comes from a space of not only inclusion, but of just not discriminating. Not only inclusion, but some of this hatred or ignorance that we have in the past. This is a nation trying to overcome this, which I give a lot of credit for, because there's a lot of countries out there that don't even address it. Okay, let's be honest. So the fact that we're trying to do something is a good thing. It's not working because the companies they're not really afraid of these laws yet. So the reason I talk about the things I'm talking about today, and I do this similar type of talk for corporate audiences as well, is because there seems to be a response like, I didn't realize that. The gist is the people that are going to get us to the next step. Right now, a lot of the things are broken that we use. We can complain about them all day long. We have to fix them. We have to find a way to get to the next level. I don't know what that's going to be, but there's probably some 7-year-old kid in Beijing right now who has an idea that's going to transform and give us the next internet. But if he's differently abled, then he's not even part of the conversation. We can't exclude an entire segment of people like the 3 people that we talked about today and expect innovation to happen. So it's not be fair. It's the law. We are a global society. This is what we need to do to move forward. I have a few minutes left, but I'd like to know if there's any questions or comments right now. Please feel free to. Any questions at all? I can keep rambling for a long time, but I want to. Yeah, I got it.
So with Hugh Herr's prosthetics there, is he making those available to the public at the moment? And are we looking at 6 figures, 7 figures for these?
That's a good question. And MIT does have public relations, so I'm sure that they're doing something for people who can't afford them, but I don't know the details. He does, if you look him up on YouTube and stuff, you'll see him going to hospitals, children in car accidents, soldiers coming up from war. He is on the front lines of helping these people, but in terms of the whole, being able to provide them to everybody who can't afford them, that I don't know.
I'm just wondering if Yuri Rubinsky would be a good person to add into your little talk.
Who's this?
Yuri Rubinsky, he was working on accessibility of texts, making books and things available for people. And when the web was first, so the step from internet, which is the underlying stuff, to getting the web and making it accessible, I think Yuri Rubinsky would be a hero of yours.
Okay, great, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, hey, how are you doing? Just a question. Did you know that the blue box was actually, the inspiration started from a Cracker Jack cereal box? Which actually had a toy in it?
Yes, I have heard that. It was a whistle that came in the box that was actually at the right frequency, I think. Is that how that came about, do you know? Yeah, it's interesting.